it is my pleasure to introduce Don Duval, CEO of NORCAT. Don has spent more than 2 decades leading, growing, and transforming organizations and businesses, working with multinational companies, tech startups, academic and research institutions, governments, and clients around the world. As CEO of NORCAT, he has transformed the organization into a global, multifaceted enterprise focused on providing programs, services, and resources to prepare workers and tech entrepreneurs with the skills and confidence to succeed. Don is also the founder and co-managing partner of the Sudbury Catalyst Fund. He is an active angel investor and sits on a variety of boards. He previously served as VP of Strategy and Operations for the Mars Discovery District, as an investment director with the Mars Investment Accelerator Fund, and as senior manager within Deloitte Consulting. Don also holds an undergraduate degree in chemistry from Queen's University and a Master of Applied Science and Engineering from the University of Toronto. Don, that is quite the bio. It is so nice to have you with us today.
Nice to see you, Alicia.
So NORCAT is at the forefront of 2 of the most important topics in mining: new mining technology and training of the industry's workforce. So let's start off talking a little bit about the technology side.
Sure.
So at NORCAT, you have an underground test mine, and you were nice enough to give me a tour when I was in Sudbury a couple of years ago. One of your primary goals with the test mine is to connect mining companies with technology providers. I just wanted to know, what have you seen at NORCAT during the course of the pandemic in terms of the pace of innovation? I mean, we've been hearing all day about collaboration between mining companies and technology providers to solve the big problems of the mining industry. So how did the pandemic affect that dynamic based on what you saw?
Interesting. Well, I'm sorry I missed some of those earlier discussions. That would have been interesting to hear if my comments and narratives are going to contradict or support some of the earlier discussions. Yeah, it's interesting, Alicia. When COVID-19 pandemic was declared, we anticipated a significant disruption to that line of our business, whereby we support these tech companies to use the mine as a place to develop, test, and/or demonstrate emerging technologies. And understandably so, the first 6-8 months, yeah, it was a bit of a slow period as the world kind of paused to figure out what was going to happen. But very quickly out of that, we noticed some interesting trends. But the root of this story is that the Underground Center, our brand for the test mine, as it's often referred to, in terms of the amount of activity and deal flow from technology companies using the mine for those aforementioned purposes that I cited, it is the busiest it's ever been. And it's been like that probably, if you do year-over-year comparisons, even 6 months ago, when we were still in the depths of the 3rd wave, trying to figure out and navigate, what was going to happen. We, candidly did not foresee this as evolving the way it did, but it seemingly was off the charts. And I've been often asked, why do you think that is? And I come up with 3 reasons that may or may not be rooted in any type of statistically valid data, but all anecdotal after speaking to these companies. And, the first one is there's a kind of a renaissance of, I'll call it urgency, among the mining companies. Those who were considering investing in, communications for underground mines to enable teleremote autonomous work, all of a sudden had a heightened sense of urgency that, we need to do this. And we saw some interesting technology trends evolving in very short order that had always been on the docket for many mining companies, be it in Canada or around the world, but now got inched forward because of the pandemic. Another reason too is, obviously with the declaration of the pandemic, there were a huge amount of government supports that were beyond just, maintaining status quo. There were, stimulus funds that were apportioned. And many of the beneficiaries of those stimulus funds were emerging technology companies that were building, economically sustainable businesses that included products or services to support the mining industry. So I would call it a massive infusion of, capital to support tech companies building products as part of a stimulus package all of a sudden created many of these companies that were in product development looking to commercialize that said, hey, what an interesting and unique opportunity for us to do the demonstration commercialization component of this technology now that we've unlocked a fairly meaningful amount of capital. So, kind of the demand side, but also on the supply side with access to non-dilutive grant capital, we saw a flurry of companies coming to us, paying to use the underground mine, and the source of those funds was not earned. It was, non-dilutive grant capital to help them get over those hurdles. So that was quite unique. And then I think the last one, and again, this is rooted in nothing beyond anecdotal conversations, but many of these smaller, when there was a migration to work from home, we found less distraction and more opportunity to focus on creativity and design. So some of the smaller companies, when we had discussions with them when they were at the mine site, a lot of the discussions were, I've had time to reflect and really focus on building because there's no external distraction given the current state of affairs. So when you add those three things together, the pandemic has, I think, really kind of reignited and kickstarted the, more on the smaller side, I would argue, but the whole tech ecosystem, building products and services to support the mining industry, us as a data point, litmus test metric, has never been busier.
That's really interesting. I was going to ask you, I mean, we've all noticed these, an influx of new technology companies emerging to serve the mining sector. And I was going to ask you where all this new activity is coming from, but I think you've just answered the question, or is there another answer to that?
Well, the other interesting thing, and I'm not sure that, beyond maybe expediting, the pandemic has direct attribution to support this. But, as I think you and I have even talked about this before, 5-7 years ago, I think we would be collectively hard pressed to name any, angel consortium, venture capital, or PE firms that really focused on supporting tech ventures, selling into the mining industry, at least exclusively. Now, fast forward 5 years later, I could probably name you a half a dozen of material ones in aggregate, probably with close to $1 billion of investment capital ready and eager to deploy for solutions that are serving the global mining industry. So not only on the non-dilutive grant side did we see a lot of supports and stimulus capital going in, but now kind of the capital markets, more so on the private side, have really woke up, if you will, to really provide these tech companies, especially the small startup and medium-sized enterprises, to really get going. So, and I can speak more as to why I think that's happening, but maybe I'll let you drive the question.
Well, no, why don't you pick up on that? What were you going to say?
Well, it's interesting, over the last, 30, 40, 50 years, the global mining industry really has migrated from, a builder of technology and innovation to a buyer, and that generally means historically a lot of these mining companies would have in-house employees that focused on R&D to build proprietary solutions as a competitive differentiator. And if you look at the trend over the last 40, 50 years, there's been a gradual divestiture of in-house R&D function, but these mining companies still need to solve complex and tractable problems. So that has given rise to what is now deemed a vibrant global supply service technology ecosystem of an outsourced innovation model where the problems are being addressed by the development of products and services by a supply side of the equation. So given that the mining industry has migrated to more of a buyer of technology versus a builder, now the capital markets can see a path whereby if I'm going to make a meaningful investment in a startup or a small to medium-sized tech company, there's now that pull side of the equation where the mining companies, if they want to enhance productivity, safety, drive competitiveness or shareholder value, whatever the tangible outcome might be, they have to buy these solutions. So as an investor in a tech company where there's a strong demand or buy side of the equation, it now enhances the probability of an investment because you could see a path, albeit still somewhat laborious, and you got to navigate a decentralized procurement model generally in the mining industry. 20, 30, 40 years ago, it would be very difficult to see that path. So coinciding with that, you've seen a huge growth in the, in the capital markets to support the supply service tech ecosystem because the mining industry have become buyers. And, how we expedite that, the collaborative nature and joint venture models, how the mining industry is enhancing their sophistication of procurement, to invest in and test and give a proof of concept opportunity to a small startup. That still, needs to be improved and is still working its way out. But I think it's only going to get better and bigger, and you're going to see a lot more capital going into the kind of the supply side of the equation, given the nature of the buy equation in the mining industry.
So it may have taken 40 or 50 years to replace that innovation function.
Yeah, and I would argue that, and again, I only have anecdotal data to support this, but the amount of time and effort and resources that mining companies historically put into development of proprietary solutions and technologies to improve their operation, I think that pool arguably is the same, if not, a little bit bigger. It just looks very different. It's no longer done in-house. It's done by a third-party outsourced innovation model, which I love. I'm a huge fan of that. I think it spurs creativity. It enables mining companies to focus on, creating, sophisticated procurement and engagement models. There's a whole series of reasons why I like it, but that's the reality, and I think it's here to stay.
So at NORCAT, you almost get a look into the future because you get to see all the cool new technologies that are being tested and validated in real mine conditions. So what are the most important areas of technological innovation that you're seeing? What are the solutions that mining companies are most looking for?
Wow, okay. Well, I'll speak from the perspective of underground mining, because that's kind of what I would know the best. And I'll speak from a position of primary research using the Underground Center as my data source versus, the secondary research that, most of your viewers would probably be very familiar with. Some of the emerging trends, and by the way, you're right, by virtue of geography and proximity, we have a unique perch to kind of see what's bubbling up in the ecosystem. But obviously the move towards electrification, especially in jurisdictions where there's high energy and labor costs, there's a huge amount of investment, time and effort being spent to really understand how that works. And it's not all, focused purely on the battery. If you look at electrification like Blue Vein, so many of your viewers are probably familiar with Blue Vein. It's a tethered electrical system. One might be surprised to learn they're getting a huge amount of traction. And it's, a model of electrification that's been around for a long time that's getting kind of a rejuvenated, view and look on how it can transform mines. And it challenges the notion of status quo, if I can call it that, batteries. So you have debates around, swap versus trickle on vehicle charge. Well, things like Blue Vein are causing, giving people a second look. So more broadly, the whole electrification transition is going to be a trend that is only going to have more time, effort, and resources allocated to it. In underground mining, continuous cutting, very often, the industry will refer to that potentially as the holy grail. If you can cost effectively enable continuous cutting, it has a whole series of benefits that you could imagine. Some of the big engineering firms such as Hatch are doing some remarkable technology development in that space. Teleremote autonomous vehicle operation, Canadian companies like Hardline, among others, is fascinating what, with a resilient underground infrastructure in terms of a communication network. It's amazing what you can do in that space, and what is already happening. So, those are kind of three themes that we see most often around electrification, continuous cutting, and this whole move towards teleremote autonomous vehicles, among a myriad of others. And again, I'm focusing more on kind of the exploration of mining supply chain. Obviously, the downstream beneficiation, tailings management, on the environmental side, there's a huge amount of technology development going in that space. But those are the three that I can safely say that we very often get into very lively discussions with mining delegations that visit the Underground Center to understand what's next. Those are the three themes that come up most recently the most often.
Don, you have a very kind of wide perspective and wide view of mining versus other industries. And I wanted to ask you, what can the mining sector learn? Given that it's in this period of huge technological change and modernization, digitalization, innovation, what can mining learn from other industries that may be further ahead in their transformation processes?
Yeah, and I think the transformation is rooted in this outsourced innovation model. So if you look at other industries that have kind of experienced that, consumer products, retail in some respects, even the med tech space, oil and gas to some extent, those large incumbent legacy industries that historically developed and, prided themselves as a differentiator around their capability to build and develop in-house proprietary solutions. If they look to other industries that have, evolved and transformed, there's a whole series of factors, but that notion of, understanding and recognizing that you have become a buyer of solutions to drive shareholder value, competitiveness, productivity, safety, whatever your outcome is, those mining companies that, and you said it at the onset, which I can't stress enough how important it is and how often we see it, those mining companies that evolve and continue to improve their ability to engage with the external, supply side, technology side, startup ecosystem, those companies that can do that effectively, with dedicated efforts and resources, those who understand how to do joint ventures, those who can support, proof of concept testing within their facilities, all of those kind of are maybe argue softer side. Anything rooted in that convergence and collaboration model, those mining companies that can do that the quickest, with the most, authenticity and high level of engagement, will be privy to emerging technologies that they can adopt and deploy faster than their neighboring mining company, and they will win the battle. They will win the battle of competitiveness. So if you look at other industries and other incumbents who are, big players in those, I'll call them legacy industries, those who have migrated to the outsourced innovation model, those who can figure out how to best collaborate and work quickly and effectively with that supply side, they will win. And that's the one takeaway that I would encourage anyone in the mining realm. Just take a deep breath, recognize that you have to buy, understand the sophistication on how you do expedited procurement, product testing, development, deployment, change management, whatever it is. If you master that, you will win.
On that note, can you tell us a little bit about NORCAT's open innovation platform and why that was launched?
Yeah, so we launched that a few weeks back at Mine Expo in Las Vegas. And essentially it's like an online marketplace that does three things for mining companies. One, we get solicitations around, our perspectives on emerging trends in certain thematic areas within a mining company. So we now have a group that does curated market research on themes that are important to mining companies. So as an example, if a mining company wants to better understand the emerging technologies around electrification, we now have a team in-house that can go out and, come up with an opinion on what are the emerging technology companies, what are the emerging trends to enable that mining company to have a clear perspective on what's in the marketplace. The next thing that we're doing are, I'm not going to say traditional, but we're doing versions of challenges and hackathons. So as we've done actually most recently with Valet, they had a series of, challenge areas within their operation in Sudbury. They reached out to us. They use our online platform. We developed problem abstracts. We promoted them out to our global network of various technology hubs and innovation centers to then subsequently do a call for companies that might have a solution. And then we have a pretty sophisticated process where we can work with those companies, build a project plan. They have access to the underground mine to do POC development testing in the underground mine. And we work with those companies in a somewhat like an accelerator to get them to the point where they have a demonstrable proof of concept that could solve that problem. So quite unique in that we have the asset being the underground center that we can support, what one might argue is a fairly straightforward, innovation challenge hackathon. We're a little bit different that we actually will take it to a proof of concept demonstration within our underground operating mine. And then the last thing that the Open Innovation Platform supports is, we call them buy-sell days. And you can liken it to a quarterly version of Dragon's Den, where we will, self-identify or invite based on a request of a mining company, really interesting tech companies that are building solutions to support, the mining industry. So we will invite the buyers, and we will have 2 or 3 companies not pitching for capital, they're pitching for a sale. So these are companies that have already raised their capital, be it through non-dilutive or equity funds. They have a product, they're looking for that first customer. Here's how it works. Maybe they have a POC installed at NORCAT already. And then we will handpick and invite mining companies that we believe have an interest in a better understanding that, and actually try to connect those companies with the desired outcome of those companies getting a transaction. So depending on the nature of the need of the mining company, we're having very different discussions right now, but we're super excited by it. We think it's quite a natural fit to our business model at NORCAT. So we're excited, and stay tuned for our next iteration with Valet in the near term, which we're quite excited about.
Great. I'll be looking forward to hearing more about that. I wanted to also make sure that we get time to touch on the other side of what NORCAT does, which is training the workforce of the future. And it's a kind of a general question, but I have to ask you this because we're in a very interesting time right now where the pandemic has given skilled workers more flexibility in terms of their working conditions, working from home, as I am, as many people are. Working flexible hours. And we're seeing that employees are enjoying more power in the labor market and quitting jobs that don't give them flexibility or otherwise leaving them unfulfilled. So where is the mining sector in this? Are they seeing any of these same pressures?
Absolutely. Yeah, even prior to the pandemic, as you'd be familiar, the mining industry, Human Resources Council of Canada and their 2019 or 2020 labor market study forecasts that in Canada alone, we're going to need over 100,000 new mine workers in a relatively modest scenario. So, so that in itself, even prior to the pandemic, created a huge skilled labor, gap, and it's only getting worse. We see it pretty much every day with mining companies that solicit to us, do you have any graduates of these programs that are looking for employment? So the demand side far exceeds, the supply side at this point, creating a lot of leverage that the employees then have to kind of pick and choose, where they want to go. And, if there was a great supplementary survey done in that labor market study by Mir that still to this day holds true, that the number one human capital challenge of mining companies still right now is recruiting. Right on its heels, number 2 is retention. So the question then becomes, what are more sophisticated ways to recruit? Are you looking at immigration, which a lot of mining companies are, as are you looking at campaigns in other jurisdictions within Canada that could be somewhat higher unemployment? Are you looking at creating more creative models of employment, flexibility, higher pay, whatever? There's a whole series of things that are happening. And then beyond that, how do you retain them? And, one of the interesting things that we're seeing, and it holds true in many industries, if not all, if I generalize, but a lot of the feedback that we get, if you are fortunate to get the right workforce, how do you retain them? And the feedback that we get is you have to have the right supervisor. People want to work for someone that motivates and inspires them. So as a data point, our supervisor training program is the busiest it's ever been, with, new or existing supervisors within mining companies coming in, getting kind of the core curriculum that we would offer. But now some of the questions coming up around, how do we become better supervisors to retain that talent? So yeah, we're seeing, a huge push on mining companies being as creative as possible to recruit, subsequent to retain, and it's quite complicated. And the only thing I'll tie in maybe to the first half that we're seeing as a really interesting differentiator is, the investments in, emerging technology by mining companies are often thought of as mechanisms to improve, again, productivity, shareholder value, competitiveness, safety, etc. But what we're starting to see more so now as the power shift goes to the employees is that all else equal, a would-be new recruit to a mining company will actually look at the job that needs to be done. And that mining company that has adopted and deployed emerging technology, creating a job that's more akin to what that individual might be seeking in a job, AKA operating a LHD using a teleremote system in an urban center. All else equal, we're definitely hearing that that incoming generation is more probable to take that job. So winning the battle for talent isn't necessarily rooted anymore in compensation, because I would argue, based on what we're seeing, is you can actually pay that prospective worker even a bit less, but they can operate with a bit more flexibility from the creature comforts of their own home, operating that LHD or perhaps 2 or 3, kind of over the course of a day. And that is how you will win the battle for talent. So the adoption and deployment of new technology needs also to be seen as a method to, win the battle for talent. And we're seeing that, even that EY survey that was done at Borden a couple of years ago, how telling is that? Whereby that all electric mine, they interviewed all of the workers midway through the deployment of all the electric underground fleet. And they essentially asked them that if the value proposition of the electric fleet doesn't prove to come to the expected fruition that the mining company had hoped, and they migrate back to diesel, would you stay? And 91% said no. I now have an experience of, this is what it is. This is what now drives me. And by the way, you can't just pay me more. It's not about that. So now the paradigm has really shifted. So those mining companies who are listening to that prospective and existing workforce to understand, how you win the battle for recruiting and how you win the battle for retention, technology is going to play a critical part. And I think without that understanding, it could be very challenging.
Oh, that's so interesting. And it was actually unexpected, the technology and retainment connection, but also that you said earlier that your direct supervisor is really important in terms of retention.
It's in our surveys that we've done, it is the #1 indicator if someone will stay or go. People join a company because of the company. People leave a company because of their supervisor or colleagues. Mm-hmm. The data shows that time and time again across any industry. So those companies, those mining companies in this context that specifically invest to ensure their supervisors know how to, navigate and manage and support and listen and all of those, somewhat, seemingly obvious things, but not always practiced. That is a critical driver of retention. And we're seeing it. We're seeing certain mining companies win and we're seeing some lose. And a lot of it's rooted when you do the exit discussions. Didn't like the people or the person I was working for. So you got to address that. And it's really important.
Are miners paying enough attention to their organizational culture as a whole and whether they're inclusive enough? Or are they just on the beginning of that journey to even look at that?
Oh, I think so. Across all industries, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is critically important. And I think most mining companies, the ones that we've worked with, especially in developed economies, are doing the right things. There's continuous room for improvement to do more, but most importantly, they're listening. And I think the listening and then driving actions out of that to ensure, be it engaging more First Nations workers, engaging more women in the workforce, ensuring that everything is, policies are in place to ensure equitable, opportunity for all, is just as important in mining as it is in every other industry. And yeah, make no mistake, the mining industry too still has work to do, but they're investing in, making improvements and in getting business done. So yeah, the trend is going in the right direction, in my opinion.
Good to hear. I'm gonna invite the audience. If you do have any questions, speak up now because we're gonna wrap up shortly. But I did want to ask you, what skills are most in demand in the mining sector right now? Because we are, as we've discussed, seeing this technological shift.
Yeah, it's evolving. It's evolving, in part due to the transformation of technology adoption within the mining industry. Again, I'll speak in the context of the Canadian mining market. So, we've done a handful of fairly sizable projects with, fairly meaningful and large mining companies addressing that very specific question. And, the historical skill sets that were needed in, especially in the skilled labor workforce, is evolving dramatically. So, case in point, if you look at some of the great work that, Cambrian College has done with the new, I'll call them electrification modules as part of their heavy duty mechanic program, they are getting ahead of the curve to provide the core skills and competencies and would-be heavy-duty mechanics that will support and serve these industrial vehicles as they get adopted and deployed in the mining industry. So that's great for that incoming generation of workers to get those skills. What do you do with many of the existing heavy-duty mechanics that are already 20 years in that have focused exclusively on diesel? So now you have a strong demand for upskilling and refining. So how do you do that? What's that going to look like? Oh, and by the way, by the time you finish that 6-month refresher for an existing heavy-duty mechanic, maybe the electrification technology has changed twice over. We're seeing it in underground communication technology as well. Understanding, the difference between LTE and 5G and LoRa and Wi-Fi. You can do these kind of incremental improvements in, training for that existing or would-be workforce. But the thing that's very different is that the iterations and upgrades and new versions of, be it software or hardware, is happening so fast that those mining companies who recognize that you need to do incremental training and incremental improvements more often versus waiting for that grandiose every 2 year take a refresher, it's not that simple anymore. So there's this, my answer to your question is that it's a the whole model has changed, whereby it's a continuous evolution of incremental, I think I've heard the term micro-credentials, but I'm not sure that's exactly the best term, but this ongoing incremental learning and development to stay in step with the emerging technologies and trends and, upgrades that are happening with those solutions that are being deployed is critically important.
Thank you. That sounds like a lot for companies to stay on top of.
Well, it's happening in other industries, right? It's happening in the financial services. It's happening in insurance. It's happening in med tech. You're seeing a recognition of continuous learning to stay in step with the emerging technologies that may or may not be deployed within your operation. And waiting every 4 years to do an upgrade, given the pace of change of technology, is no longer going to cut it.
Well, thank you so much, Don. I think we're going to have to leave it there if Robert is ready to come back on and introduce the next speaker. But thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to speak to you again, as always.
Yeah, likewise, Alicia. Take care.